Hello children! Today we are out here looking for some arboreal ant species up in this tree. Now you might be wondering why I just said up in this tree. Yeah, I climbed a tree up here to find some ants. So hopefully we find some cool ants, or else I climbed this tree for basically nothing.
Alright, already we have ourselves with an ant, although unfortunately one of the most common and destructive invasive species of ants in the world, Taponoma melanocephalum, or the ghost ant. These extremely common house pests are also unfortunately one of the most common arboreal ant species to come across. However, thankfully for both ant watchers and exterminators alike, they are extremely easy to identify, with a relatively small and chunky appearance, and a contrasting black head that sticks out from the pale yellowish rest of the body is extremely distinctive. The genus Taponoma can be identified by the presence of exactly 11 antenna segments. Still, let's be honest, the pest control guy probably isn't carrying around a microscope 24/7. This ant on this leaf right here is another invasive species here in South Florida, Tetramorium simillimum, or the groove-headed fierce ant. While thankfully not a house pest, this invasive is still one that I find relatively commonly on trees, in leaf litter, and underneath rocks. This is the only Tetramorium species that can be found in South Florida that is entirely orange. The other species are bicolored with a darker abdomen. The groove-headed part of the name comes from the two distinctive ridges on the top of the head, and the fierce ant part of the name comes from how aggressive they are, even towards one another. I've actually observed groove-headed fierce ants of the same colony attack each other, using the bite force of their mandibles as a weapon. Now these groove-headed fierce ants seem to be nesting underneath this leaf, as now I can see many more than just this one individual I saw before. Alright, I've noticed a trend. Much like lizards, most of the common ant species here in South Florida are invasive. This little bicolored reddish and black ant is yet another invasive called Cardiocondyla obscurior, or the arboreal sneaking ant. As you can tell by the name, these ants nest in trees and tall shrubs and spend almost their entire lives looking for food in these tall plants. I've never found this species on the ground. However, Cardiocondyla obscurior is almost identical in appearance to a species called Cardiocondyla amerii, which breeds exclusively in the ground, and I rarely ever see them crawl more than a foot up surfaces. Although the workers are identical, the queens of the two species are very easy to tell apart, and their foraging behaviors are different enough. Finally, a native ant. This right here is a Cuban twig ant, or Pseudomyrmex cubaensis, a member of one of the most unique subfamilies of ants, Pseudomyrmecinae, which have an unusually elongated body and massive eyes for an ant. Like most Pseudomyrmex cubaensis nests on trees and tall shrubs. This native species is very similar to an invasive called Pseudomyrmex elongatus. However, elongatus would have a narrower head, longer eyes, a taller petiole node, and is usually a little smaller. Every dark Pseudomyrmex I've seen on this tree has been cubaensis, so even without a close look, it's still safe to call it this. I seem to have caught an interesting behavior in the act right now. This larger, shiny black ant in the middle of the frame is an Ashmead's acrobat ant, or Chromatogaster ashmeadi, and it is surrounded by these smaller brown ants in the hundreds, which are an invasive species called the African big-headed ant, or Phaedole megacephala. Not sure if the invasive Phaedole were trying to kill this Chromatogaster for food, or if they were trying to drive it out of their territory. But either way, I tried to help this native Chromatogaster out, but it was basically impossible to get this to crawl onto any twig without any Phaedole following it and trying to harm it further. Thankfully, it's not like this is harming any populations of the native Chromatogaster, as they are still relatively common on these oak trees, and Ashmeadi is by far the most common species. If you're questioning why those little brown ants were called African big-headed ants when their heads are so tiny, I don't blame you, but this right here is a major worker, showing the large head they use to protect the colony. This right here is the Florida flattened tree ant, or Xenomyrmex floridanus, a native species that I find pretty commonly on oak trees. However, their tiny size, slow movements, and the fact that it's rare to find them outside of their tiny little nesting holes that they make on dead twigs, these are rarely seen by anyone else. And a glaring lack of observations of them on iNaturalist severely underrepresents just how common these are to find on trees. Oftentimes, I don't actually find these ants. Rather, they rub onto me when I'm walking through wooded areas, and I don't notice them on me until I feel a tickling sensation. These ants have an unusually flattened body that you can't really notice until you look at it from a direct side view. This allows this species to fit into tiny little cracks in trees, as well as their tiny nest entrances. Here is a really exciting ant. This is the common gatekeeper ant, or Colobopsis impressa, a really impressive species, all pun intended, that you might not be able to tell is so amazing just by looking at this minor worker, which kind of just looks like your average black ant that you'd find on a tree or in your house. However, there's a really interesting story behind the name common gatekeeper ant. The much rarer major workers have a flattened head that looks like they were hit with a pan, that they use to guard the nest entrance, basically being a gatekeeper letting ants in and out.
Alright, well I'm happy we managed to find some pretty cool stuff up here, but I have to find a way down now. If I just... Hold on, wait on a minute. Hold on a minute. If I just go around back here. Just like that. And...